Start of narration: imagine being a prisoner of war. Your country defeated, your future uncertain. Suddenly, your captors appear, and they are nothing like the monsters propaganda had described. Instead, they are kind, generous, and surprisingly handsome. This isn't a Hollywood script. It was the real experience for a group of Japanese women held as posed by American forces at the end of World War II. Their story offers a fascinating glimpse into the human side of conflict, a side often lost in the grand narratives of battles and politics. This incredible account comes from a memoir titled The Internment Record of the Women's Volunteer Corps. Written by a woman named Kaio, she and 253 other young women were part of the Japanese Women's Volunteer Corps, sent to Manchuria during the war. After Japan's surrender, they found themselves in a terrifying situation. First, they were captured by the Soviet Army, an experience filled with fear and hardship. But their journey was far from over. They were eventually handed over to American forces and taken to a POW camp on a small island near Luzon in the Philippines. For these women, who had been raised on a steady diet of anti-American propaganda, this was a moment of pure dread. They had been taught that American soldiers were brutal beasts, demons in human form. As the U.S. soldiers approached, the women braced themselves for the worst. But what happened next was something none of them could have predicted. Instead of brutality, they were met with kindness. The American soldiers, seeing the women were exhausted and malnourished from their time with the Soviets, immediately offered them food and water. They handed out chocolate, chewing gum, and canned goods, luxuries these women hadn't seen in years. One soldier even tried to share his own meal with them. This simple act of humanity was a profound shock. It completely shattered the image of the American devil they had been force-fed. The camp itself was another surprise. It was clean and orderly. Women were given proper tents, clean bedding, and even toiletries like soap and toothbrushes. There were regular meals, medical care, and facilities for washing. Compared to the grim conditions they had endured before, this felt less like a prison and more like a strange, unexpected sanctuary. The American GIs in charge of the camp were disciplined and respectful, maintaining a professional distance, but always ensuring the women's needs were met. But it wasn't just the kindness that caught the women's attention. As they began to relax and observe their surroundings, they noticed something else about their captors. Kaio writes in her memoir, "We've never seen men like this before. What was so different? Well, for starters, the American soldiers were tall, very tall, and well-built. Coming from Japan, where the average height for men at the time was significantly shorter, the physique of the American GIs was striking. They were also incredibly well-groomed. Their uniforms were clean, their hair was neatly cut, and they carried themselves with an air of confidence and ease that was completely foreign to the women. In a world where they had only known the rigid, formal discipline of the Japanese military, the relaxed and often smiling demeanor of the Americans was captivating. Kaio and her friends would secretly watch the soldiers as they went about their daily routines, marveling at their physical presence and their cheerful attitudes. One of the most popular spots for soldier watching was the beach. The GIs would often go swimming or play games on the sand during their downtime. For the Japanese women, who had been raised in a very conservative society, the sight of these men, shirtless and laughing freely, was both shocking and fascinating. Kaio describes how she and her friends would find excuses to be near the beach just to steal a glance. It was a source of endless gossip and blushing whispers. They couldn't stop staring. Of course, this wasn't some whirlwind romance. Interactions were strictly supervised, and a respectful distance was always maintained. But this period of observation allowed the women to see the Americans not as enemy soldiers, but as individual human beings. They saw them playing pranks on each other, writing letters home with looks of longing on their faces, and showing small acts of kindness to one another. They saw their humanity. One particularly memorable story from Kaio's memoir involves a soldier they nicknamed the Professor. He was an older, more serious man who would spend his free time reading. The women were intrigued by him. One day he noticed them watching, and instead of getting annoyed, he simply smiled and gave them a little wave. This small, friendly gesture meant the world to them. It was another crack in the wall of prejudice that had been built up for so long. Life in the camp settled into a routine. The women were given tasks to keep them busy, but they also had ample free time. The Americans provided them with books and magazines, and even organized occasional movie nights. Watching American films was another eye-opening experience, offering a window into a culture that was vibrant, free, and so different from their own. These moments of shared entertainment further bridged the gap between captor and captive. This strange, surreal period lasted for several months. Then, in early 1946, the news came. They were finally going home. The journey back to Japan was organized by the American military. The women boarded a ship, once again under the care of U.S. soldiers. As they sailed away from the Philippines, they looked back at the island that had been their home and prison. There was a mix of relief to be going home and a strange sense of nostalgia for the place where their entire worldview had been turned upside down. The soldiers on the ship were just as kind as the ones at the camp. They made sure the women were comfortable and well-fed throughout the voyage. As they neared the shores of Japan, a sense of melancholy settled in. These women had formed a unique, unspoken bond with their American captors. They had seen a side of their enemy that they never knew existed. Kaio recalls the moment of departure. The women lined up on the deck, and the American soldiers stood at the gangplank to see them off. There were no grand speeches, just quiet nods and smiles. Some of the soldiers waved, some of the women bowed deeply. It was a silent acknowledgement of the shared experience, a moment of mutual respect between former enemies. As Kaio walked off the ship and back onto Japanese soil, she took one last look at the American soldiers and thought about how profoundly they had changed her. This story, hidden in the pages of a personal memoir, is so powerful because it reminds us that even in the midst of war, human connection is possible. It shows how simple acts of kindness, a piece of chocolate, a friendly smile, can be more powerful than any weapon. The Japanese women in that camp didn't fall in love with the American soldiers in a romantic sense, but they did come to admire and respect them as men. They saw their strength, their confidence, and most importantly, their humanity. It's a beautiful testament to the idea that our common humanity is stronger than the divisions of nationality or ideology. The war had taught them to hate, but their experience as prisoners of war taught them to see beyond the uniform. When Kaio and her friends said, "We've never seen men like this before," they weren't just talking about height or looks. They were talking about a spirit of generosity, respect, and kindness that they never expected to find in the heart of their enemy. And that is a lesson that is just as relevant today as it was all those years ago on a small island in the Philippines. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from history. We love digging up these lesser-known accounts that reveal the amazing complexities of the human experience. Let us know in the comments what you think, and we'll see you in the next video.